War. Something that we here in the US used to consider a national emergency has become background noise. But why is this? The US is engaged in military conflicts across the entire globe. We have spent trillions of dollars on war over the last couple of decades, yet we never even think about it. We have killed nearly 1 million people, displaced tens of millions of people, destabilized entire regions. And that doesn't even include what other countries have done with the weapons that we have given them. Yet this isn't even a main topic of discussion within our politics. Actually, it's kind of taboo to even bring it up. And this is by design. If you're new here, I'm Lou Hawley, and welcome to the family. The military-industrial complex plays the center role in shaping America's foreign policy. But before we get into that, let's go over exactly what that even is. The military-industrial complex, or the MIC, consists of 3 different things that work together in a close yet shadowy, mutually beneficial relationship. Number 1 is the military establishment itself. This is the typical U.S. military that you imagine whenever you think of soldiers, generals, etc. Number 2 is the government, the actual politicians and the appointed bureaucrats that shape defense policy and allocate government funding. And number 3 is the defense industry that supplies our military with their weapons and equipment. These are private corporations like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Northrop, Grumman, and General Dynamics. This triangular alliance creates a very powerful, self-perpetuating force that influences public policy and government spending enormously. Which brings me to my point. The military-industrial complex plays the center role in shaping America's foreign policy. And this leads to, well, this has such a drastic effect on our country, on every single one of our lives, that you're going to have a hard time believing what I'm about to tell you. I want to shrink this down for a second to really simplify what's going on here. I grew up in the city, okay? And as most cities are, the city was kind of dangerous. Not only because of one-off criminals robbing you for your wallet or trying to steal your car or something, but because there's a lot of gang violence or crew-on-crew violence that floods into every high school, every downtown, every club, and it catches a lot of people in their conflict. You get the point. And one thing that I noticed while I was in high school was that there were people that really loved to inflame those conflicts, sometimes by simply gossiping to a crew they were cool with about another crew that they knew they didn't like, sometimes by even getting people hurt and then blaming it on that other crew. But once you started to pay attention, you started to see that these people that were always raising the temperature were the same exact people that were selling all of the weapons in school. That is exactly what a large number of people working within America's military-industrial complex do, but on a much larger scale. Instead of creating havoc within a school, a neighborhood, or a city, these people do it on the global freaking scale. Now, before we get into exactly how they do that and who's benefiting from it, let me just ask you something. Are you okay with that? Before getting into any details, are you okay with major corporations here in the US that have major influence over our politicians being, simply put, being rewarded for war? Because it's a simple question. If you block out all the noise for 5 seconds, all the euphemistic jargon we use here to disguise what we really mean, are you okay with some of the biggest corporations in our country being rewarded for war? Because I'm not. Not when it creates an incentive structure to push for more war, and that's exactly what it does. I'm about to give you 3 crazy numbers. Well, the first one is actually common knowledge, but the second one is insane, and the third one will put all of this into perspective for you, okay? Number 1, there are 535 members of Congress. There are 700 lobbyists hired by top defense to lobby those members of Congress. So yes, there are more defense lobbyists than actual members of Congress. And the third crazy number, 72% of these defense lobbyists are revolvers. meaning they are former government officials, congressional staffers, or military officers who now lobby their former colleagues, agencies, and friends for a lot of money. So that means that these enormous companies that rely on war to make money, who donate millions of dollars to politicians every single major election cycle, then meet with the politicians that they give money to discuss policy, who also hire people that used to work in the government to meet with these government officials who work with other organizations that benefit from US spending money on weapons. And you put all of that together, and what that means is that these giant defense corporations get quite a large seat at the table when we're deciding if we should bomb someone or simply give money to someone else to bomb someone. You want to know why we're always stuck spending trillions of dollars in forever wars or funding wars we aren't even a part of? You're starting to see why. Think about this for a second. America hasn't actually won most of its wars since World War II. We get a lot of stalemates. We get quagmires. We get exits that feel like a poorly planned, humiliating retreat. And yet, quarter after quarter, the contractors post gains. That is not an accident. It is a model. When Congress votes to send aid overseas, Israel, Ukraine, you name it, doesn't matter. Most of those dollars cycle right back to American arms makers. It gets handed right to those top 5 or those only 5 contractors I told you about, either to build new stock or to refill what we shipped out of our own stock. It's branded as aid, but functionally, it's just a huge subsidy to specific corporations that make weapons and equipment. That is all it is. When you break it down and simplify everything, that's all it is. If you don't believe me, watch how markets react to war. It's awkward to even say out loud, but you've seen it. Big spikes for specific corporations when fighting escalates. You can argue about which ticker moved how much and when, but the pattern is clear and obvious. Conflict creates demand. Demand creates orders. Orders create revenue. Revenue makes shareholders very happy and a lot of money. And the more open-ended the conflict feels, the safer that pipeline looks. Do you think these people are upset when we get involved in another conflict overseas? Do you think these people are upset when Russia invades Ukraine and we decide to fund them for the next 3 years? Or the Israeli-Palestinian conflict escalates and now we're sending Israel an extra $20 billion on top of the $3.8 billion we already send them every year? I promise you, they aren't crying about it. The U.S. military-industrial complex needs war, and they've become very good at making sure there's someone that needs their weapons at all times. We provide 43% of all major weapons exported across the entire globe, which is more than 4 times the share of the next leading exporter, France. And we provide almost 70% of all weapons imports to NATO countries. We are the world's arms dealer. Kids pick up pieces of missiles that just bombed their town, potentially killed their family members, and it has USA painted on the side of it. That's part of the reason everyone loves us so much. And the worst part is this. People warned us that this could happen. President Eisenhower literally coined the phrase military-industrial complex on his way out of office. He wasn't a hippie. He was a 5-star general who fought in the biggest war in modern history. His warning was super simple. We completely ignored it. His warning was if you fuse permanent mobilization with permanent profit, you will create a permanent set of incentives to keep the money flowing. And what are we seeing today? We are seeing exactly that. Think about NATO for a second. After the Cold War, a bunch of countries joined NATO. To join, they had to meet NATO standards, which basically just meant switching to NATO-friendly gear. In plain English, they needed to buy a lot of US and European weapons and equipment to meet the standards set by NATO. So yes, of course, there were real security reasons for expanding NATO, but it also created a huge new customer base for American defense contractors. And here's how U.S. foreign military sales actually work. The State Department approves a sale. The Pentagon helps manage the order, and the buying country pays. Sometimes the U.S. gives that country security aid or financing that ends up covering part of the bill or all of the bill. And then all of that money then goes to American manufacturers. You can call that, smart industrial business policy, or you can call it corporate welfare. I definitely lean towards the latter. Either way, the cash flows back to U.S. defense companies. They continue to print money, and they continue to help politicians get rich. It's a nice little business model we got going on. And even though they aren't a part of NATO, we can look at what's happening with Israel right now to see how this actually plays out. Regardless of your thoughts on the war, the munitions that level buildings in Gaza don't come out of thin air. People on the ground literally find fragments stamped with American manufacturers' names on them, right next to USA painted on them as well. You don't have to agree on the politics to see the pipeline, the problematic pipeline. Congress appropriates funds. The administration routes the funds. U.S. companies fill the orders. Meanwhile, Israel's missile defenses, like Iron Dome, depends on parts we fund and produce. When fighting intensifies, Washington fast-tracks more money. Without question, everyone votes for it, and the cycle continues. You can argue that's maybe necessary for an ally's security, sure. You can also argue we should stop sending so much money to foreign nations. And clearly, I'm not much of a neocon, so you can imagine where I fall on this. Do I want our allies to be safe? Of course I do. Do I think we should maybe be debating a bit more over how much money we're allocating to all these wars, all these weapons we're sending out and everything, before we just greenlight every single check when it comes to war? Yeah, I think that maybe this deserves a little bit more of our attention. And this isn't something that just started yesterday, by the way. Since 2001, we've spent enormous sums of money on the post 9/11 wars, and a huge chunk of that went straight to private contractors. Logistics, weapons, contingency services, you name it. Afghanistan ended up turning into the longest war in U.S. history. We left in complete chaos. Props to Biden for pulling us out, yeah, sure. But our pullout game was an absolute mess. Our pullout game was an absolute mess. And the budget did not shrink after we left either. It actually grew. That alone should tell you everything about incentives. We have a permanent business model that only satisfies its stock owners when we are funding war. So once again, I'll ask you, are you okay with this? If you're an American, these are your tax dollars padding the pockets of these weapons manufacturers. These are your elected officials, your elected representatives getting lobbied, financed, or dare I even say it, making millions in the stock market, investing in companies like Lockheed Martin, and then voting to fund another war. In a system where we know there's corruption, it is pretty wild that we allow our government to exist in such an incentive-rich environment to benefit themselves, but hurt the country so greatly. We get all these warmongers and pedophiles calling all the shots. I mean, what are we doing? These people are investing $100,000 into Lockheed Martin, texting Epstein for a quick hangout, and then voting to fund another war the very next day. What are we doing? I mean, look, America, we gotta start getting our shit together, because everything we got going on right now, things have gotten out of hand. So how did the industry get this consolidated and powerful in the first place, right? That's an important question. How did 5 companies become the world's arms dealers? Well, to answer that, we need to go back to the 90s to revisit a dinner that was coined the Last Supper. What a sick name. It's a famous dinner the Pentagon hosted where defense leaders were basically told, look, the Cold War is over. Budgets are coming down. Merge or die. So what did they do? They merged. Around 50-ish firms became a handful of behemoths. Fewer bidders means less pressure to compete on price and more leverage over the buyer. And the buyer is, can you guess it, our government. Layer on top of that the lobbying. Oh my God, if you've watched this channel before, if you watched me before, I have a huge issue with our current state of lobbying. So layer on top of all those issues I just mentioned, our enormous lobbying industry. Hundreds and hundreds of registered lobbyists working the Hill for the big 5 groups that I just mentioned. We even have expert witnesses at hearings who turn out to have funding ties to these big 5 corporations. Again, this is not some tinfoil hat conspiracy theory stuff. This is how K Street, the lobbying street, works across industries. But here's why this entire structure is uniquely dangerous in the defense industry, when the same ecosystem that profits from conflict is also the ecosystem shaping the arguments for why conflict is necessary in the first place. You have a structural conflict of interest. That conflict of interest means that we are forever engaged in wars in countries I can't find on a map, while simultaneously funding at least one side of every other war happening across the entire globe. And like I said, I don't give a shit what your opinion is on specific conflicts happening across the globe. The fact that we have this incentive structure baked into the cake here in our entire American political system is terrible. It is unsustainable, and it is corruption at its finest. And if that's still not enough conflict of interest for you, then look, there's this lovely, beautiful thing called the revolving door. I mentioned it earlier in this video. And this revolving door exists between the Pentagon and defense companies. Active duty officers sometimes do short stints inside one of these major defense contractors, then go back to jobs where they help set the requirements for the defense contractors. Retired generals and admirals land on these corporate boards of these defense contractors. Senior civilians bounce between government positions and defense industry positions. Now, you can argue that this helps the military understand what's possible and get better gear, I suppose. Yeah, sure. You can also argue it makes the two sides so tight and so cozy that what we would think of as the public interest starts to look a lot like whatever the big contractors want, and doesn't really look like it's in the interest of us, the public. Both things, I guess, can be true. But this is something that we don't even want to discuss. Politicians don't think it's any big deal at all. And here's the part that should bother everyone. The Defense Department still can't even pass a clean audit. Literally, they fail their audit year after year. Now, if the largest bureaucracy on Earth can't clearly track a big chunk of its assets, how are taxpayers, you and me, how are we supposed to know what we are getting for the money that they're spending? And if Congress keeps increasing the budget while not demanding basic accountability, how is that responsible oversight? Well, I'll answer that. It's not. It's quite seemingly the opposite of responsible oversight. But no one ever seems to even question this. Yeah, sure, I'll see some YouTube videos about it, I'll see some influencers talking about it, but the people in power, why do they never question this? No one ever seems to put their foot down and say, what the hell is going on here? All we do is continue to increase the funding, decrease accountability, and increase the ways these corporations can gain more influence over our politics with their money. This is not a long-lasting recipe for a healthy nation at all. But let's be fair, okay? There are real threats in the world. Yeah, of course, I'm not going to deny that. And obviously, we all know that deterrence costs money. Weapons keep our allies alive. Jobs in this weapons manufacturing sector are, held by real people with real families, with real mortgages. I'm not denying any of that. Of course, that's all true. But if you can't say out loud that the business model rewards endless demand, and endless demand requires endless war, then we will never work to actually decrease the amount of war we are at least somewhat involved in. And if every single crisis becomes a reason to raise the base budget forever, you don't have a strategy. You have a system of autopay. And that autopay is part of the reason we are in so much debt right now. That we now pay $1 trillion every single year on the interest on that debt alone. Do you think that's sustainable? Do you think our debt is sustainable? Do you think being engaged in endless war is sustainable? Do you think providing everyone with our weapons across the globe forever and ever is sustainable? Do you think we can afford this? Do you think that maybe we're making a lot of enemies across the map? Do you think that maybe our men and women serving in our military and their families deserve better? That they at least deserve a discussion of whether or not this is beneficial for them and for us? The answers are, of course, we can't afford to do this forever. Of course, we are making enemies. And of course, our service members deserve better. Look, most Americans don't wake up wanting war. They want a government that defends the country without treating permanent conflict as a freaking revenue stream. They want audits that actually mean something. They want hearings where the so-called expert isn't quietly on a contractor's payroll. They want to know that when our government writes checks to these defense contractors, it's because we must, not because the right people made the right calls to the right offices. Eisenhower told us the only counterweight to this kind of entrenched power is an alert and knowledgeable citizenry. That's you and that's me. Regardless of your opinion on specific wars that we're involved in, we are the people paying the bill. And the only predictable thing about war these days is that we are sure as hell gonna pay for it. Look, like I've said throughout this entire video, regardless of your stance, your opinion on specific conflicts happening across the globe right now, maybe it's time we start to think about war differently. Maybe it's time we start to think about our role in war differently. Maybe it's time that we at least have the discussion. I'm Lou Hawley. Thank you so much for watching. Please do subscribe if you haven't already. This is a new channel, and that really helps the channel grow. I hope you have a great day.